because you take things for granted. I think when you're doing well, and you take your foot off the pedal sometimes, and you get comfortable, and that's not who I want to be. That's not why I was successful, and what brought me into this country. And now I want to sort of, I suppose, go back to my glory days and demonstrate my sort of talents. And this little forced break, has given me the energy to do that.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Melbourne's culinary landscape has experienced the heaviest impact of the pandemic in Australia. The second lockdown not only put the viability of many establishments in question, but it's had a monumental impact on those who carve out a career in hospitality too. With cases down to single digits and a new roadmap released by the government, what does the future hold for the Victorian hospitality sector? Paul Wilson is the owner of Mr. Wilson Consulting and currently consulting to Morgan's Sorrento. Paul, how are you going?
G'day, Huck. Well, considering I've been living under martial law for the last 7 months, governed by a leader only loyal to himself, and who's created these draconian policies and opinions which have created an erosion of our freedom here in Melbourne, which was formerly the world's most livable city. I'm doing okay, surprisingly. I think moving to the country was a smart move for me when all this sort of started, and I feel for my colleagues in the CBD and the fringes of the city, because I think that there's more pain to come. I think it's like you said, it's an interesting phase in our industry, with the latest figures being very, very positive. Only 5 cases today, but unfortunately, the work begins once we come out of lockdown. That's when the pain really kicks in.
There's been a lot of anticipation about these daily briefings and also what the roadmap was going to entail yesterday. How do you feel about that, given that there's not really much mention in regards to hospitality?
Well, it's extraordinary how the government's just basically has no empathy for the hospitality industry, and complete disregard for the restaurant's contribution to Melbourne's culture and tourism, and that financial contribution must be significant. And the amount of people it employs, especially in the younger community, it's a vital industry. So it's been really, really surprising, and we've all become quite sort of, I suppose, incompetent about it. We've sort of absorbed the fact that our industry won't change. We'll be the last ones coming out the gate, and we've just used this time to raise awareness of how there is so much disregard for our industry as a whole. I think there's been a lot of, the industry was, let's be honest, was pretty much rooted before the pandemic in Melbourne. It was struggling. There's restaurants closing left, right, and centre. Restaurateurs being litigated for various reasons to try and make it, their eyes, trying to make a living, and it's caused a ripple down the industry, with many more closures forthcoming, and this pandemic's basically given some more hardship, but some, I suppose, a lifeline, because of JobKeeper and because of government support. They will linger a little longer, and speaking frankly, the industry does need an overhaul. It needs a recession of sort, to sort of get rid of the sort of the negative operators, and this is what's going to happen in the next 2 years, I hope, reluctantly.
You were part of a group of very respected business owners in Victoria that sent an open letter to the Premier of Victoria about unlocking the hospitality industry. Can you tell us a bit about that and what you guys would like to see?
Well, we're frustrated. We were told in the first sort of conversation, when the initial restrictions were implemented, that hospitality was one of the industries which wasn't causing outbreaks, and it was more meatworks and supermarkets and other sort of sectors of the industry. And then all of a sudden, we had the most punitive landscape ahead of us. And then, you go to the supermarket, and as one of one of our members said, it's like a disco. You know, it's a free for all. There's people touching the produce. There's no isolation at all, and the staff are pretty sort of laissez-faire about everything, and it's really quite contradictory to see supermarkets thriving and other businesses thriving when surely when there's such a erosion of freedom, you need hospitality, you need that sanctuary, you need those places to go and protect your mental health, and we're the most, in my opinion, the most governed industry in terms of hygiene, in terms of traceability, and so really it's just been an ignorant approach to hospitality. We don't know much about it, so we'll just close it down. You know.
You've been a consultant to many successful operations in Melbourne, and you've been working with Morgans at Sorrento previous to the pandemic. What's been the impact there, and can you tell us about the impact on them and what has affected you as well?
Yeah, well, the impact for us since the pandemic is we had what we believed was an amazing future coming out of a sort of a dire period. I had a restaurant a couple of years ago, and I was, unfortunately, I had to sort of sell my shares and get out of it because of many reasons. But essentially, the restaurant wasn't performing as well as I hoped, and it was quite an eye opener realizing the costs and the results of running a restaurant in the 21st century. Um, and so I decided we had to move to country Victoria and carve out a sort of niche client base and try a different part of the world for our industry and for our business. Because a lot of people in Melbourne are moving to the country. It's a lot closer to the CBD than it ever has been before. Lots of new roads and new sort of opportunities here in country Victoria and Metro Melbourne. And one of them was a significant hotel renovation. The Sorrento Hotel the Continental Hotel was being relaunched, and that's a massive project. And that was essentially 3 years' work for us. Plus, the owner, Julian Gerner, had a very busy restaurant on the water. It's a bit like, I suppose, Sorrento Stokehouse, Morgans. And we had two other pubs in the area too, which wanted to engage us. So we had about $500,000 worth of work on the table, and that just wiped off the table in a matter of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. All the projects fell over. Two hotels decided they weren't going to reopen or renovate due to the restrictions. The big project changed ownership. Julian couldn't keep the project alive, so he had to sell it, and that meant we weren't engaged for the new entity, and so we now have one client, and that's Julian, and that's Morgans, and it's survival mode for him and his business and his staff, and he's thankful that he's got our resources available, and we're thankful to him for the opportunity to sort of relocate and move away from the depressing CBD, and essentially we've had to start from scratch and new menu direction, which was interrupted by the pandemic and bushfires, and they gave us a chance to have a breather after the first lockdown. We sort of had a chance to step back and assess, was this new concept working? And it was working in terms of guest feedback and covers and certainly certain efficiencies within the business, but it wasn't profitable enough. These days, restaurants, they're 5% profit at best, but to survive, you need to be hitting 15%, 10 to 15%, and that's what our client needed because it's a seasonal business. And so, after the first lockdown, and experimenting with takeaway and sort of gourmet meals to go and hampers. There's a lot of work for a small team and very little profit, to be honest with you. It's an exercise of mental health, positive mental health. It keeps people engaged and enthusiastic about what they're doing, but as a commercial venture, it's folly, in my opinion. And so we decided to rebrand the business after the second lockdown and opened with this really sort of fun gastro pub offer, a really tight menu, one of the smallest menus I've ever done for a client. Especially on the beverage side, it was remarkably effective. Just seeing how tolerant customers are to a smaller beverage offer in terms of wine list and all the other sort of added on cocktails and being in country Victoria, the client base is a lot of blue bloods, a lot of mature, retired, wealthy types, and they're not really interested in trendy concepts and trendy food. They just want something delicious and something with good value, something comforting. So that's right up my alley, to be honest. And so we developed this really good gastro pub offer, and Julia's never been busier. Those sort of 60 days we were allowed to trade, or so. He was thinking this is the best thing ever, and why don't we do this all the time? And but he, sadly, he could justify it because it was a pandemic. He could say, "Look, guys, this is the menu. This is what we can do, and take it or leave it." And I think that's taught him, and I think that's a valuable lesson for the industry is to create models which work for you coming out of this pandemic. Don't create models to win awards and to get yourself in the paper. You really got to be focused and selfish because it's survival. We're in a serious recession. Put the ego aside and make some money.
What position is Sorrento in at the moment? And do you see that this model that you're talking about that's tighter and works a lot better, is that something you think will move into the future with the business?
Certainly will for Julian and Sorrento. Sorrento is such a seasonal location. It's only an hour away from the CBD on a good day with traffic. But its population is about 500 people. And so Ports is 500, and Sorrento is about 1,500 or so. So it's a very small base, and most of the people live in the CBD, and they've come here at the weekends. And it's extraordinarily busy at the weekends, and it's a ghost town through the week. And to have that sort of tight offering in terms of stock holding and food management, it just makes perfect sense. Um, and it also it's the most consistent way of working as well. And I think the industry does its best work when it's consistent. So it makes so much sense when you think about it. But why are you going to restaurants where the menus as big as War and Peace and there's pages of wines to go through? That makes no sense. But that's what the restaurant industry sort of celebrates. So it's a funny one.
Regional dining has come a long way in Australia in the last decade, but certainly Victoria, it could be said, is leading the way in regards to regional dining. They've just been allowed to open up again, albeit for not very many numbers. What sort of impact has this pandemic had on regional dining?
Well, I think it's crippled them like the whole industry, but I do believe they're going to have the most buoyant times they've ever experienced in their whole livelihood. Um, we won't see international travellers here in Melbourne for at least another 9 months, in my opinion. I can't see any flights before there's some sort of vaccination for this disease. So, you know, where do you go? And the borders are still closed. So, buckle up. You're about to be in for the busiest time of your life. And that can be a bad thing as well. That can also sometimes when you know your market and it's the same every week, every month, every year, you're in control. As when it gets it's extraordinarily busy, things become very inconsistent. So to answer your question, I think it's very positive for regional Victoria and country Victoria. I think it's positive, but be careful what you wish for as well. And where do they get the staff, and and how do they, I suppose, maintain that standard is the challenge now.
At the top of the show, you mentioned that you had a lot of concern for your colleagues and industry friends in the CBD, with a lot of workers not going back to their offices for still we're still uncertain when that will be. What do you think is going to happen to Melbourne city restaurants?
Well, I mean, lunch is finished. I mean, lunch was $10, or $5. That was the sort of number the dollars you were chasing for lunch. And if you're a restaurant, that doesn't stack up, does it? And so there's no lunch trade now. There won't be a lunch trade, in my opinion, for a while because everyone works from home. So you have to sort of write that off, and that means by and large redundancies and staff redundancies, which is dreadful. And so it becomes almost like an all-day business, I suppose, or just dinner focus, which can be good. I mean, this sort of opening only when you make a profit is makes perfect sense, but the industry doesn't operate that way. Hospitality restaurants, they open 7 days because they pay rent 7 days, and they have staff on the wage bill, so they just operate. It's a very old-fashioned way of looking at it, and that's the Melbourne way. You see it in the UK and America, and certainly in regional Victoria, you only open when you can make a profit. And it's like the nightclubs, they only open when they can make a profit. And I think restaurants need to do that moving forward, and that's the future for a lot of restaurants in the CBD. Those sort of 4-day weeks, 3 days off, 4 days on, make a lot of sense financially for your payroll, and probably is the new norm moving forward.
Anecdotally, Melbourne's always talked about as being the food capital of Australia, and you've had a heavy influence on that over the last couple of decades, and you made a real name for yourself with the Botanical all those years ago. How has Melbourne changed, and why do you love the restaurant scene there so much?
Oh, it's a curse, isn't it? The restaurant industry. It's a love affair we all can't cure ourselves of, and that's all we know. And personally, coming from London when it was at its peak in the 90s, it was the most enthusiastic time for creative restaurateurs and sort of the rise of the celebrity chef. And so I was sort of fueled up with a lot of enthusiasm and hope and excitement for a career in Australia. And Melburnians were very kind to me, very kind to the British influence. They called us the Brit Pack and gave us a very warm welcome. I think because our food resonated with Victoria's climate. Um, you know, we sort of connected really fast, and there's some wonderful chefs come over, and who are not just cooks but great trainers, and had a great eye for detail and style and fashion, and the whole of Melbourne at that time was very hip, and British culture was very hip at that time, and it sort of led to um, a really great career and working with really amazing restaurateurs where they took their private wealth and took a leap of faith and invested in our industry. The likes of Chris Lucas and Maurice Tazzini, and they've been some of the most creative and prolific operators in Melbourne and Sydney. And you work with those characters and those sort of creative minds and business minds. It becomes even more affectionate. You want to do more. You want to contribute more. You want to open more restaurants. You want to be part of this culture, and that's been my journey, and that's why I've become a consultant, because I can't just do one thing. I have this brain and this energy that I want to do more than one thing, and it is a curse because it doesn't make sense, especially in an industry which is not very profitable. But it's a labour of love, I suppose.
Well, it's a common thing you hear about people in the industry that they sort of can't sit still. They need the high energy of it. They need to be doing multiple things. But during this time, some have really struggled with being away from the thing that takes up a lot of their energy and their time. How have you personally coped during this period?
It's I've had a lot of personal challenges at the same time as the pandemic. My parents have been very sick for the last sort of 10 months, 12 months. We were fortunate enough to get over to the UK in December and visit my parents, who are in their sort of late 80s and both in both in private homes and essentially dying. And it was awful to see them in such a state. 'Cause you don't go home as often as you like. You go home every 3 or 4 years, and the change in them this time was really made an impact on me. It made me very thoughtful and to be quite grateful for my years ahead of me and my health, or to protect my health. And so I came back from the UK thinking I need to re-energize my life and get my career back on track. 'Cause it's been a rough couple of years, and I thought, I felt really sort of positive about moving to the country. Then the pandemic kicked in. I was like, it's sort of frozen my ambitions. What do I do? How am I going to entertain myself? And it's luckily where we are. It's so beautiful, and we're on the coast. It's just long walks, and I bought myself a mountain bike. And you know me, I'm a big fella. Me on a bike is a sight to behold. Let me tell you. Like a bison in the bucket. And so that's been very entertaining for the Sorrento locals, let me tell you. But no, but really, it has been very cathartic to sort of go for these long walks in the beautiful part of Victoria, to exercise, and to sort of do things out of my comfort zone. Has made me feel really good. Just reducing alcohol and not eating meat and eating seafood because I'm right by the water here. And these subtle changes to my lifestyle have kept me sane and remained this positive outlook. I'm still very positive, Anthony, about the future of hospitality and my future in particularly, because I feel terrific. So I think that's really important to people feeling negative at the moment. You really got to, if you want to change your future, you really have to make some changes. You can't change the past, but you really can change the future.
There's no doubt you made a huge impact on Melbourne's dining landscape, but how did you get into the industry back in the UK?
Well, I was very lucky. My neighbour was a fairly famous chef in terms of his working at a beautiful hotel in St James's called the Stafford in Mayfair, which is very popular with the royal family who are just around the corner at Buckingham Palace. So that was my first job at the age of 14, working in a Mayfair hotel. And hotel kitchens of that era was part of the sort of Ritz group. So it was very old school, gastronomy, different departments. You had a proper pastry department, a proper butchery, a proper sauce department, a rotisserie department, grand old kitchens full of theatre, full of characters. I was the only young man who was English, who wasn't sort of a raging lunatic from Greece or Spain or from Italy, or so the language was choice, and the smells and the excitement and the grandeur of all the silver and the waiters in their outfits, and the luxury hotels in those days were really luxurious, and the attention to detail was insane, and the characters and the sort of leisure activities around a hotel when you weren't working were. That's how I learned sort of my manhood, I suppose. I had my first drink when I was in a hotel, and met my first love of my life. That's the sort of culture of working in London hospitality. It's very consuming and very exciting at the same time. And through that sort of great introduction, because I was, I suppose, so welcomed, and I knew the head chef, and he looked after me and made sure I was a success. I got recommended to other hotels, and you didn't need a CV in those days. It just ring up the chef at the Ritz or ring up the chef at the Dorchester, send along your protege, and you were looked after, and you became a success there. And my career went so fast. I remember starting at the age of 14, then next year I was 27, running Quaglino's, the world's busiest restaurant and the most hippest place in town, winning many awards and for my sort of endeavours for being so young. No one could believe I was running this organisation at such a young age. But I've been in the industry for sort of 15 years. So that's not 10 years at that stage. So it's just, I suppose I started young and benefit from that youthful experience. And in London, they're great trainers. You get a real, it's like the army. You get a real drilling, and there's no room for error. So you're very, very sort of head down, bum up, and consistent with your work and your career. There's no distractions. And then before I knew it, I was running this amazing restaurant, getting paid well, and I was a young man, and I was just like, this is the best thing in the world. Like, being a chef in London doesn't get any better than this, And Australia was um, well spoke of because of Quaglino's had a lot of great Australians working there, like John Turode and Martin Webb, and a lot of the front of house staff were Australian. And these people were very unique and very excited and very outgoing. And English people are quite reserved and quite demure. You meet an Aussie in a restaurant in the kitchen, they stick out for great reasons, And I wanted to be part of that culture. I wanted to see it for myself. I heard so much about Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, and it never disappointed. I mean, it still doesn't disappoint. I mean, Australia is one of the most wonderful places to work and live in the world. We're just, in a bit of a stranglehold at the moment, but we're coming out of it. So it's a lot to look forward to, I think.
Well, with the numbers coming down, there is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and the industry will open up again soon. And you said there's a lot of positivity, and you are quite hopeful about the future of the industry. What some of the things that then you think need to be put in place for the success of the industry moving forward?
Well, what's been, I suppose, because the politicians, in my opinion, have done so badly here in Victoria, it's highlighted their incompetence or their lack of knowledge about certain industries, and that's given us a voice, given us a reason to protest and communicate. And I think it's people are listening. Some of these new grants have been released to the hospitality industry, are very encouraging and certainly give you an opportunity to restart your business. And you know, I haven't seen that in my lifetime in Australia, so that's a good thing. And I think so people listening and understand that there is challenges in small business and in hospitality. If things aren't going right in the economy, then things aren't going right in hospitality, and there has to be support and reforms to protect these vital industries that contribute so much to our culture. And so government needs to look at, you know, fringe benefit tax that needs a reform. We need lunch. We need customers back in our restaurants spending money, and that in turn gets people coming into the city, shopping, doing other things. Just the whole knock-on effect. Just having a simple lunch in a restaurant. Rents. They another arbiter to look at the rents in Australia, and the rents, particularly in Melbourne, are ridiculous, and they should be based on turnover, in my opinion, not just a fixed rent plus turnover. There needs to be more of a retail sort of outlook on rent, in my opinion. Um, and there's penalty rates. As much as I think everyone should get paid fairly, in some regard, the penalty rates are just not in sync with our revenue streams and our food costs. And somehow there needs to be this sort of communication with Fair Work and the government to sort of expose our numbers. Unfortunately, the industry has been quite remiss at exposing their numbers for obvious reasons. But there's no cash flow anymore. People pay with credit cards, no cash, so you're not protecting your cash flow by being private about your business. You need to be more open with about your business and share your challenges, and hopefully you'll see some benefit from that rather than scrutiny. I mean, the tax laws in Australia are ridiculous. Being a UK resident living in Australia and talking to my family and overseas, and the tax here is extraordinarily punitive. And but you put up with it because you live so well in terms of it's safe, it's clean. They're the sort of uplifts. But tax reforms, fringe benefit tax in particular, rent. Um, these are the fundamental things. The subtle changes make a big difference to our industry.
You mentioned that you've been exercising more and you've changed your diet, and it's given you a new lease on life and a new focus. Do you think this experience has changed you forever?
Oh, no doubt. Um, I mean, just being alone, not alone. My wife and I being alone together. We're both quite sort of outgoing people, and who's the boss in our house is quite amusing question we get asked a lot. To survive, living with my beautiful wife, who's got an incredible outgoing nature. I've been looking for the off switch for the last 7 months, but I haven't found it yet. But no, that's not true. That's a bad joke. But it's what it's taught me is I've become more resilient and more positive. I think the more stress you have in your life, the more you learn to deal with it, and I think that's what this whole pandemic has given me is this kind of steely exterior, which I think will be with me forever. I think I've always been a big man, but I've always been a bit of a softie, and I think this whole pandemic experience has made me more resilient and more positive, more determined. Because you take things for granted, I think, when you're doing well, and you take your foot off the pedal sometimes, and you get comfortable, and that's not who I want to be. That's not why I was successful and what brought me to this country, and now I want to sort of, I suppose, go back to my glory days and demonstrate my sort of talents. And this little forced break, has given me the energy to do that.
You mentioned earlier how successful a smaller menu can be, particularly wine menus in restaurants. Will this experience see a new Paul Wilson? Like, what will we see from you in the next year or two, do you think?
If you asked any of my chefs about small menus and Paul Wilson, they would just fall off the chair. The two don't go hand in hand. Me and Neil Perry are the sort of the reasons why I think Melbourne's got big menus. It's a London hangover. When you're running big restaurants with doing more than 1,000 customers a session, which was Quaglino's, you have to have a big infrastructure. So I brought that to Melbourne, I suppose, and it's a good question. And working with Morgans in the country of Victoria has really showed me the success of a small menu. And the great restaurateurs of Melbourne, like Andrew McConnell, has always been the sort of trailblazer for a small menu, and I was always the sort of the antichrist to that. And I think that's been my learning, looking at how a small menu and a sort of local talent can become this force. It's taught me that small is beautiful, and the more control you have, the better the sort of product. And certainly from the back end, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And wine lists. I mean, unfortunately, we're blessed with too much wine here in Australia, and then we have the international wine brackets. I mean, how do you have a small wine list when you've got so much wine, which is so good? And how do you navigate that? Well, that's the new challenge, isn't it? That's sort of you got to work on your business and keep those wine lists refreshed regularly, and um, have a rolling list. I think that's the excitement of the new normal.
Well, Paul, when the industry opens up again and the restaurants are full, how are you going to celebrate?
I'll miss tap beer. Isn't it funny? Little things like tap beer has been my sort of hankering. Um, so I'll probably celebrate with a good tap beer. And Carton Draft is the Victorian beer of choice, and it's a very simple beer, but there's nothing better than a cold Carton Draft on a hot Melbourne summer's day. Let me tell you. So it's probably how I'll celebrate, and just look forward to exciting produce again. I mean, I really feel for our suppliers and farmers. The farmers have taken the biggest hit, in my opinion, during this pandemic. Our beautiful farm. I say our. It's not my farm. I call it our because I feel so close to it. But when I set up Wilson Market, we had a small farm grow exclusively for us, a biodynamic farm here in Fingal, not far from where I live now, in country Victoria, Mornington, and they grow everything to order. So you have a meeting with the farmer, and you basically have to predict how many carrots you're going to use, and how many aubergines you're going to use, and how many bunches of herbs you're going to use, and you have to commit to that every week, and you sign a contract, and you basically go into an agreement with them, and you commit to a purchase. We will spend $150,000 a year with this farm, and but it was an investment which was, I would have spent 250,000, because the quality and how it underpinned our menu, and the yield of this extraordinary produce, and the taste was our competitive edge. That's what brought people to our restaurant. And after they grew for us, and Paul being not shy on social media at that time and exposing their talents to everyone in the industry and customers talking about it and the media talking about it, they picked up another client, Embla, and then they picked up Heston at Crown Casino. So it had like three, really great clients, appreciated their endeavours, really good badge of honour supplying those restaurants. And then my situation changed quite quickly, as it does in restaurants, and I was out of there 6 months later, mid contract. So they basically had all this produce sitting there waiting for me, and they tried to continue in the same vein as us, but they couldn't continue because the numbers weren't there, sadly for them, and so they lost that client. And unfortunately, Andrew McConnell's group came in, and so they became a supplier to Andrew's group, which is like 5 restaurants. It sort of turned their world on its head in a way, and they grew even more. So then Heston went under, and then they picked up, I believe, another client, Bridget Hafner, down at Tedesco. They picked her up. So they had like these 4 or 5 amazing clients growing to order, and then pandemic kicks in. What do? You got fields of produce, and you got agreements which are in the bin, and you've committed and done all the work, and just what do you do? And so everything went to the local IGAs, everything went to farmers markets. For half the price, I might add. So they really suffered and nearly went broke. But through all of this sort of hardship, what they wanted to do originally, when they first started working with us, was they started as a farm to grow seed for other farmers. And this is the thing in our industry: we have no seed in Australia. Would you believe? Everything we grow is imported. There's only hobby farmers that have seeds, but as an industry, there's no seeds for biodynamic organic food. There's a massive shortage, and this misfortune for transition farmers created an opportunity now. They only grow seed for the industry, and they won't go back into restaurants, or maybe they will for a couple of loyal clients. But my conversations with the farmers they're now focused on seed, and they are going crazy. I mean, they are, because people are growing their own vegetables at home during the pandemic. People are doing so much, the way the industry is going. They want to have that traceability. It's the most sustainable way of farming. So that's probably, for me, a really positive story that come out of this whole dilemma for farmers, that we've got another new business, new enterprise coming our way, providing the seed for our restaurant industry and for the community at large to have beautiful organic food available all the time, which is a wonderful thing.
Well, that's extraordinary, and it's always extraordinary talking to you, Paul. Thank you so much for your time today. Please keep in touch, and hopefully...
No, thank you, Huck. Thank you to the media out there and everyone listening. You guys have been an absolute renovation. What's the word I'm looking for? An absolute, can't express. I'm going to be emotional here, but how the industry is galvanized together, in particularly the media, how they've supported restaurants and chefs through this pandemic has been extraordinary. And I applaud you, and I applaud you, Anthony. This is such a great metaphor for our industry. We really need to be heard, or to cry, or to celebrate, or to be positive. We need a voice, and you've given us a voice during this pandemic, and you should be applauded, and thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Paul. You just made me upset too. Thank you for that. Always good to chat, mate. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Take care, mate. Thank you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.